Welcome to the Cricket8 Podcast. I'm Jarrod Kimber here with the man, the myth, the limp biscuit. It is Rob Barron. Hello, Roberto. I want to talk about bilaterals a little bit here today, because I find how much of the India Sri Lanka did you follow? You were probably trading on some of them.
Yeah, most of it. Yeah, I watched nearly all of it.
So I don't want to ask you as a trader, as an analyst or anything, but I want to ask you a bigger picture question here is, what is the role of bilateral cricket in the modern world?
It's to make sure India get as much money as possible, like all other cricket. That's what its job is. I think they're great. They used to be much greater. Where has the Tri-Series gone? Why don't we get more of those? They were brilliant.
Well,
the Commonwealth
you know why
Bank
they died?
Series and all that. Tell me.
Because you have to have the two away sides play each other, and it costs too much money. That's essentially what it is. So you could probably do it for India and on occasion England, but no one else would do it. So it just kind of died a death.
Yeah, some of those were great. As we all know, ODI is the best format of cricket. Always has been, always will be.
It's in the top three.
There should be more of them. ODIs are great. Maybe they should have slightly better organisation of all cricket so that ODI can have its place and do, a fair cycle before Champions Trophies and World Cups, and that's fine. But they are fun. We shouldn't forget that Sri Lanka-India series. There was a lot of fun cricket in it, a lot of terrible cricket in it as well. Like, how was that? The T20s were daft, and then the ODIs were super fun because it was like, well, let's just blast this 230 off because I'm right and that's what I'm going to do. And everyone else was like, oh shit, you've got out. Now what do we do? We need 4 and over, and we've got 10 wickets in hand. Let's fully panic against Jeffrey 9 middle names Van der Sey.
Because I look at bilaterals differently now, and if you look at the way the two teams played it, I think Sri Lanka were playing to win, right? And that was the idea, and they were out there to win, and they probably needed to beat a good side because I can't remember the last time they actually beat a good side. It certainly doesn't happen very often, and India's different, right? They were trying Washington Sundar as a frontline bowler, not as the fifth option. They were trying Rian Parag as the fifth option. They had batting lineups up to 10. There was a sense of experimentation with it. And I actually think that is what the future of bilaterals is. Like, if we're going to play them, as you said before, people want to keep making their money. That's fine. That's how these things work. But from a cricket team perspective, I actually think the best thing that you can do is just have fun with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, Try some things that you wouldn't try. And so for me, this was a very weird series in that Sri Lanka got exactly what they wanted out of this series. But I would argue that even though India lost, they got exactly what they wanted out of this series.
Yes, I mean, I think if India think that Parag and Dubey is their fifth bowler for any format moving forwards, they've got the wrong answer. I hope it's proven to them that. But the funniest thing was, I know it was the T20s, but when they had plenty of Siraj left, and they went Rinku Sky, who got 4 for 8 between them off their 12 balls, 19th and 20th. That is what I want to see in my bilateral series, is that kind of madness. But India just asked loads of questions and kind of got the answers that we knew already. Like, they cannot go... Do you remember... It's happened a few times in World Cups where big teams just totally disrespect the fact that they have to use 5 bowlers and go, well, we're going to use 4, and then the fifth one is we'll find the time to bowl 10 overs of AB de Villiers or Virat Kohli. It's like, what the hell are you doing? You're going to get murdered in those 10 overs, and that's where you can lose the game. And now, more so now than 12 years ago when they were doing that nonsense, your fifth bowler will get taken apart these days if you bowl dross. If you bowl 60 balls of crap, it's going to go for 125. And that will lose you an ODI. So, fine, maybe they thought that Parag had enough. On certain pitches, that round arm crap could be fine. The really slow and low ones. One of those pitches was spinning 2 feet for anyone. Like, let's not forget Sri Lanka didn't have a single pace bowler fit for the whole series and still won. Yeah, fine. They've proven that they don't have good fifth bowler options, and they've also proven something that we kind of knew already, but this is glossed over an awful lot in Indian cricket. Yes, they're the powerhouse. Yes, they've got the biggest strength in depth of all the teams. They've got all the money. They've got all the population, whatever else. If Bumrah doesn't play, they're really vulnerable. Full stop.
Yeah, but I think, again, that's a good thing. The Rian Parag one's interesting because they've got 2 World Cups coming up in conditions where he might be able to bowl on occasions, right? One's going to be in the UAE, which I would assume are the sorts of pitches that should help a bowler like him, and the other one's in Sri Lanka, right? And Sri Lanka and India, right? So again, I would assume the conditions are going to favour the kind of bowling he bowls. The issue really is that he's never going to be their fifth bowler, I don't think, in a World Cup. Like, I don't think they're going to AB de Villiers him, right? I think it's much more like, and sorry to everyone who's forgotten the AB de Villiers bowling overs in the semi-final of the 2015 World Cup. But what I do think with Rian Parag is they're putting him in a situation where he has to work out being a fifth bowler in future, hoping he's a sixth bowler, right? So I think they played everyone up a role in their bowling on purpose to test their durability and strength and flexibility and develop those guys a little bit more. I'm all for that. We both agree that Rian Parag is not an all-rounder and will not be, certainly not home and away conditions all-rounder.
No chance.
But he might be a very good sixth bowler in Asian conditions, and he might be a very handy chop-out bowler occasionally outside of Asia, where he can bowl 2 or 3 overs in a one-day or 1 over in a T20 to help out the numbers a little bit more. But you're right, he can't do that. But the best way to train him for that, I would have thought, is to get him to bowl 8, 9, 10 over spells. The problem with this for him is that half the time when he came on, they felt like they were already like 4, 5, 6 wickets down, Sri Lanka, or they were mid-collapse when he came on to bowl, and the conditions were so helpful. And it's sort of, there were times when you thought to yourself watching India, it was like, this is the Liam Livingston thing of like, if Liam Livingston's doing really, really good, that's not a good sign for your team because the other team probably has better spinners. Yeah, and it was a bit the same looking at Rian Parag at times. But I still think that's the best way of doing it. But just to get back to, I think Sid's just put a message up here. Bumrah is a bit of a shield when we think deeply. He compensates for everything. So at the moment, let's just have a look at a few of the things that Bumrah really helps him with. And they're still a really good team. Like Mumbai has Bumrah, and that doesn't always go well, right? So we know that India's a better team. But he covers for the fact that Siraj and Arshdeep are not consistent seamers. All right, they both got very high ceilings, but I would argue they both got very low floors as well.
Definitely.
Right? They probably need one other seamer who's just a little bit more Bhuvi Kumar-esque, right? Someone who just gets the job done, who they can throw in. So Bumrah helps them with that. He helps them with the fact that when any game is close, you're going to back India, or you and I specifically will back India, because we think that he's going to get them over the line. We know he gets wickets at the other end. We've done the maths on that now, and that's completely proven that he does that. And he also allows for your batting when you are in a position, not that this series really played out, but when you are batting first, there is a cushion there that Virat Kohli probably used a little bit in the T20 World Cup final of, but we've got Bumrah, right? Yeah. It does cause an issue. The other side of that is it's a good issue to have.
If you can keep him playing for the next 30 years, then absolutely fine. I was doing some Bumrah work yesterday, and in the last 3 years, he has bowled 43% of his deliveries in T20s as dots. That is a freak show because he bowls top and tail and the odd one in the middle when they're going well. He only comes on when it's hard. Yeah. That is, and 80% of all his balls in the last 3 years have either been 0 or 1. That is absolutely mental. So what happens is when Bumrah doesn't play, India are good but very beatable. And when Bumrah does play, if he's on, if the rest of them turn up even a bit, India are absolutely fine. So, yeah, but what a great problem to have, because I'm not going to go on about it forever again, but England had one of those called Jofra Archer, and they snapped him in half. To be fair to India, at least they've managed to get him on the park, and he's won World Cups for them.
Someone else has mentioned Shami. Yeah, I mean, Shami's the other seamer. But again, I think at Shami's age with his injury history, he might play in world tournaments, but they're not going to play him in many bilaterals. And on top of that, I don't think you can guarantee he's going to be available at all times the way that you might be able to with certain other seamers. There's some interesting questions here. Rakshit says, should teams ever choose a pitch the pitch favours in a toss for a bilateral? If the end goal is a World Cup, why not do the harder thing? So I made a whole video over at my channel about this very thing, that I don't understand why teams in bilateral games are choosing the thing that they're already good at or the thing that is statistically better, when actually what you should be doing all the time is getting yourself ready for World Cup. So I think that's a very, very interesting one. And just on Siraj, he's a spree wicket taker, Vignesh says, and I don't think India have produced any. It's a very good point. I think I always compare Siraj to Stuart Broad in that they're not natural bowlers, as in there are things that go wrong with them quite often when it comes to their rhythm and their confidence and their balance and all these sorts of things. But when they're actually at their best, they're almost unplayable, those two bowlers. But they have big periods of time when they're nowhere near their best. And the difference between Siraj and Broad is Broad's best was kind of boring but okay. And Broad's worst, I should say, was kind of boring but okay. Like he was a crappy English stock bowler when it wasn't working right. Whereas Siraj doesn't seem to have anything to go back to when he's not in rhythm. And that's a huge issue for him.
Yeah, when Siraj is bad, he's absolutely dreadful. But I don't think he's a T20 bowler. I never have thought that. And
what do you have? One spell in 10. One really great IPL season, or maybe one and a half?
He does one spell in 10 where it's hooping early and he gets on a roll and he gets his 3 for 4 off the first 2 overs or whatever. And you're like, wow, this guy's unbelievable. And then it doesn't swing the next day and he gets smacked for 50. He has no consistency in white ball, particularly T20s. He's very hittable when it's not going his way and his head drops. And he also offers you nothing in the field or with the bat. So he's not a guy for me for T20s. Srisanth was fun. He got wickets like a, Srisanth, if you want a spree wicket-taking bowler here all week. He was fine, but he cheated, so you had to get rid of him.
I think he was already kind of gone at that point as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a valid point. I think Zahir Khan probably took wickets in sprees. I think they have had, and obviously, Bumrah can do the same, and Shami probably does the same. Certainly in World Cup, Shami does the same. So it's not like Siraj is alone. It's really just, if I was working with Siraj, it would be, how do we bowl on your bad days? What do we do on your bad days?
That's what Zahir learned how to do, didn't he? He developed the skill, particularly towards the end of his career, bowling dry. And Broad and Anderson did that for 3 or 4 years. One of them wasn't very good in most of the test matches they played together. And they went, right, okay, you just bowl dry then and I'll take the wickets. And it can work like that. If Bumrah has somebody up the other end that isn't getting spanked, this is why Mumbai can't win the IPL, because they've only got Bumrah. Nobody else can keep the runs down. All of those pacers are going for 5 runs and over more than Bumrah does. But if somebody in India can at least lock it up, and they used to just go, right, well, that's Jadeja's job. He's only going to go for a runner ball, and that's the end of that. But he's getting on a bit now, and people are finding him out. You should, if you're doing bilaterals before World Cups, do you remember when Bangladesh were building up to a World Cup and they bought like 3 teams to Bangladesh and just created the absolute horror show? Mirpur, wasn't it? Australia came over in COVID, and it was like anybody that got 30, that was like 100. So what the hell are you doing? The World Cup is in completely different conditions. It doesn't help you. Yes, it's funny watching Stoinis and everybody else getting out for nothing. I think it was Matthew Wade's face was my abiding memory of that series, of just like totally clueless against the ball, gripping and spinning and whatever. But they're playing a World Cup 3 weeks later on roads, and it didn't help and they got blasted. So yeah, you should do that. You should try stuff. You should, whoever said that you should have do the wrong thing at the toss so you practice it. Absolutely, all that. Totally agree with that.
We've got a couple of questions about the pitch. This is quite funny. So Drew says, SLC is a bit desperate with difficult pitches for limited overs. Can understand it for tests, but ODIs. That's funny on many levels. But then Sachin says, pitches in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh are so horrible. India lose back-to-back series in Bangladesh too. It became impossible to play spin on those decks when you need to score runs. The reason I find these comments so funny is this is exactly what Australian and English fans say when they have to go and play in India. And the Indian fans say, just get over it and play on the pitches. Like, I think we can all argue that there are issues with Bangladesh pitches, which they're slowly starting to fix, I would say, over the last couple of years. I think their pitches have been slightly better. They've still had some really low and slow grippers. But I think in general, their wickets are starting to improve in overall quality. Sri Lanka is the place that spins the most in the world. If you're going to play limited overs cricket in Sri Lanka, you are going to assume it's going to spin even more than India anyway. It's really interesting that this is where we've got to. I think this is good for India. If India are in a situation like this and they have to reassess their game, to go back to the thing we were talking about with the guy who was talking about the toss earlier, I think this is a really good thing. Going in a position here where you're never going to have multiple World Cup games with these sorts of surfaces unless we have huge problems like we had in where was it? Where was the semi-final of the World Cup just recently?
One of the Dallas or somewhere.
No, the one in the semi-final.
The Windies one.
Yeah, that was terrible.
Oh, the Afghanistan game. Sorry.
Yeah. you generally in World Cups you don't get many wickets like that, but practicing in those sorts of conditions, in that sort of situation, I actually think is a really good thing for
Definitely.
For the way that it moves forward and everything else. So
It's what's made
I've got no
cricket
problem with
great is the differences of conditions and people getting tested in different conditions is why cricket is better than the other sports where they just play in the same variables every single time. There's loads of fun stuff associated with differences in conditions, but what's happened is because of all this franchise stuff, groundsmen are pressured to create roads because people want to see sixes and high scoring games. And so India has now gone away from being guaranteed spinny unless England or New Zealand or South Africa comes and plays a test match, then it's definitely going to spin. But on these T20 tournaments, it's just road after road, isn't it, the IPL now? Yeah. It regressed a little bit towards the end of this one. But Sri Lanka, it is definitely going to spin. And what's wrong with that? There's no, Bangladesh probably, sometimes those pitches in Mirpur were kind of a joke. It was like 50 was nearly impossible for anyone to score a 50. However, if you're there to win matches, why not play to your strengths and create a pitch that was it Bolivia kept winning football matches because they played in the mountains and no one could handle the altitude. Bolivia's home record for like 20 years was unreal because no one could breathe when they played there. It was like, well, they're not going to beat them if they're playing them at sea level, are they? So why not? I'm all for that. If you can, people say it's doctoring pitches. It's not. Like having home conditions is an advantage in cricket. But if you're playing in World Cups, you need to prepare yourself for them. It does feel a little bit like cricket has sort of lost itself, and the limited overs, you get the chance to have a World Cup or a big tournament, whereas Test matches, it's not going to get much better until everybody takes the World Test Championship seriously, and they have a proper scoring system that's not total bollocks like it is now.
Also, just to go back to all that from talking about the guy who was saying before about the toss and about, doing the thing that is harder or the thing that is wrong. So India probably would have wanted to bat first on some of these pitches, but it's actually better that they batted second because that was the tougher conditions and they were testing themselves more. But for the fans who are complaining about this from India at the moment, I'm like, yeah, well, it's costing Sri Lanka their bigger issues because Sri Lanka are in a situation where we know generally what World Cup wickets are like, and they're probably not going to get to this level, right? Unless something goes horribly wrong, like what happened in the West Indies and the USA. In general, across cricket, it's slightly more bowler friendly, probably not going to be quite the way it is. But you'd rather your team practice in bowler friendly conditions before a World Cup than batter friendly conditions because we don't have many batting friendly World Cups. Right? There aren't many times when the pitches are completely flat. Look at England. England had the 2019 World Cup. Every pitch England played on coming into that 19 World Cup was the best batting surface in England. Suddenly the World Cup came and it was a bit more even, right? And we see that consistently. So those things are interesting. Hugh has asked a question that I'm just going to quickly answer and we can move on here. He says, I reckon it's high time for the ICC to scrutinise players migrating and playing for other countries because that has become a serious issue. I now see subcontinental players in most of the emerging teams. Hugh, go back and have a look at the first Australian team and tell me how many people were born in England. And have a look at the first 20 South African teams and how many of those players consider themselves either British or English as well. We should get in a time machine. Cricket spreads in this way. Also, you can't stop it because most of these players now have multi-ethnic backgrounds and everything else.
What's your thoughts on playing for multiple countries, Jarrod?
So the ICC had a regulation in for a long time that you could play for an associate country and the next day you could play for a major country. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
So Dirk Nannes could play, essentially, he could have played for the Dutch on the first game of a World Cup. And then, if there was an injury to Australia, be brought into the Australian squad for the Australian second game. That seems ridiculous to me. Once you have picked a side as an international athlete to play national sport for, that should be a 3-year window minimum, shouldn't it? You shouldn't be able to play for 3 or 4 different
it should be
teams.
Forever. But I love you've had your career with South Africa and your Rusty Theron, and now you can go and play for America or whatever. Yeah. I do like that, but it is a bit of a joke. And the Luke Ronke thing was a real joke. You can't play for 2 proper countries. You can't play for Australia and New Zealand. That's not allowed.
So I don't mind that because I think of it from a you remember Grant Elliott? Like Grant Elliott didn't move to New Zealand to make it rich, right? Like
Yeah.
he moved to New Zealand because he knew he wasn't going to get a chance of playing at the ultimate level in his country, and he moves to another country. Now he never played for South Africa, so it is slightly different. But let's say he had played a couple of games for South Africa. So is he supposed to never play top level international cricket again because his country doesn't like people who bowl 82 miles an hour over 88 miles an hour? Like, we know that Grant Elliott was an international quality player. He did pretty well against South Africa in a game, if we remember, maybe an important game, right? But he was never going to get a chance to do that. So I don't have no problems with athletes doing this. And we see in the Olympics, you're watching athletes from all around the world do that. Also, I remember who's the England football manager? What's his name?
Southgate.
Yeah, that dude. He said that when you look at the under 19s or under 21s from around the world, most of the players were qualified to play for multi countries, right?
Yeah, look at France. And France won a World Cup when 7 of their starting 11 could have played for basically French colonies. You know, Algeria, Zidane, and Ivory Coast, and all that.
Yeah, and you know, and I look at my son downstairs who will alternate between cheering for Sri Lankans, English, and Australians based on who is in front in any particular race, right?
Correct.
So I think the idea that you can't migrate and whatever, like it doesn't make sense. These athletes want to get to the top level that they can, and in a lot of cases, they're not actually really migrating for cricket. They're sometimes using cricket as an excuse, right, to go to a different country and try it anew. So if you look at what happened with the Netravalkar, the former under 19 Indian player who went to the USA, he didn't really move to the USA to play cricket. He moved and then played. And I think that's a very different situation as well, right? There's a difference between that and the active recruiting that USA did, right? But I would argue that the USA is the only country I've ever seen really offer players money to come to their country. Everyone else has done it for either opportunities or a lifestyle change or whatever. And once you've moved to a different country, I don't have any issues with it. Let's finish off here with a little bit of Graham Thorpe. My first question to you is just, what are your memories of Graham Thorpe?
So Thorpe was my favourite England player when I was growing up. He was one of the reasons why I became pretty much obsessed with cricket, because I don't want Jack Callis when I want a hero with the bat. I want somebody who fronts up when it's tough. And all of Thorpe's memorable innings, the one they show on TV in England all the time is the one in the dark in Karachi. But the one in Sri Lanka where he got 113 not out of 250 in the first innings, was absolutely dead after that because no one else did any batting. Then England collapsed again and he had to come out and face 50 balls or 60 balls in the second innings when he was dead and did it again. That was like what I was about 19, I think, at the time. What an absolute hero who just digs in when you really need him. And Thorpe had to come in at 10 for 2 like half the time. Like, he was in a crap team. And I think he might be underrated. And when people think about how good, you talk about good middle order bats, or, Thorpe is in the conversation with all the greats. He's not Lara, is he? He's not Tendulkar, fine.
Yeah.
But as far as English bats go, in my lifetime, he is up there with people like Peterson. Yes, he doesn't average as much, but he played in a much harder era.
Yeah,
and he was.
And when he played in the easier era, he averaged over 50 for what was the last 2 or 3 years of his career.
He's come back, so he had a year and a half out of the side, which is a joke, and then he came back and averaged like mid-60s after when they decided that Thorpe was actually the right answer again. And one of cricket's great questions, and I remember at the time in 2005, which is obviously the most hyped and continues to be the most hyped cricket series of all time, everyone was saying, should it be Peterson or Thorpe, right? And you couldn't argue with Peterson getting the nod, but I think Thorpe's last innings was something like 70 not out against Bangladesh or whatever. He should have been in instead of Bell. Yeah. And England would have pissed that series because Bell didn't score a run in that Ashes. I don't know why nobody asked that question. Why is Ian Bell playing and why isn't Graham Thorpe? But I mean, fair enough. England did phenomenally well for the next few years or whatever. But Thorpe is kind of a bit of a forgotten man in terms of how bloody good he was and how much he always wanted to perform when the going was tough. And that's what I want from my heroes when I'm growing up. I don't want to see Callis coming in at 400 for 4 and scoring a really boring slow 100. I'm not going to remember any of them, and he did it half his innings or whatever. Thorpe came in when England were in the shit, and time and again he dug them out of it.
Yeah, so for me, he's a really interesting one because I think it was him and Daryl Cullinan were the two of the players who actually, when we started to look at match factor, so looking at literally what the average was of top order players in that in their test matches, they were two guys that got a bit of a bump, right? And then you have a look at the fact that also if you look at the era that they batted in, they both batted pretty much predominantly through the 90s, in which most people didn't make any runs, right? And you know, so he ended up, I think, in the sort of the very long list of the top 50 test batters of all time. Graham Thorpe was either, you know, probably a fringe player or just outside of that list. And then the other day we were doing the best left-handers of all time on my podcast, Cricket8. And again, he was mentioned. At no stage is he in any of these lists. Like he was a step down from that. But when you factor in the absolute chaos of 90s English cricket,
Yeah.
and what was happening, and you know, we make fun of them now because they occasionally make bad decisions. Could you imagine if we were podcasting on English cricket in the 80s and 90s? Like, geez, we'd probably both be put in jail for the things we would say. If we would be, you know, and I say that as an Australian, I would still have been annoyed at how stupid they were back then. And you look at all those things. I do think with Thorpe, he's undervalued because his team didn't do very well. And you can throw Andy Caddick and Darren Gough probably into that list as well. Because there were so many great cricketers around the world doing so many brilliant things, and Thorpe was just, you know, his numbers don't pop, but like he has a better batting average. I would say off the top of my head, he would have a better batting average than say David Boone or Mark Waugh, right? And yet both of those would have a much better reputation than Graham Thorpe.
Yeah. Also, he had, you know, Australia has this a bit, but the tabloids in England are full scum. They're like the worst thing in the whole world. And they were on his case for a substantial part of his career. And they've ruined many a sportsman in this country. The tabloid press just hounding them and going through their bins and all the rest of it. And that is really tough stuff to deal with when you're meant to be performing at high level when you're playing sport. And yeah, the Sun and the whoever it is, Daily Mail and all those scumbags, have, if there ever is a final reckoning for those people, they're not going to fare very well. Why are you laughing, Jarrod?
No, it's just I just love the idea of them having to plead their case. Where you know where as headline is shown to them. Anyway, so that made me laugh. I think we'll wrap up the podcast there. Sid says Netravalka is an Indian family's wet dream. It's an odd sentence to read out loud. I didn't want to watch him bowl with my parents. Okay.
That's a great place to end. Is wet dream and parents in the same sentence?
Well, that's why I thought. Like, that's why I thought the idea of a family's wet dream, like, is just a little bit off-putting. But anyway,
No,
Akash says, can you guys talk about South Africa versus West Indies? MASH is actually out there, so I'm sure me and Rob will probably get on some podcasts with him next week if he's got good Wi-Fi. It's in Trinidad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's in Trinidad at the moment. So if we can get him on some good Wi-Fi, we will chuck up some podcasts with him. But I'm sure either way, if we can't, when he gets back to the UK, he'll be there. So he didn't do a podcast this week because he was traveling. So we'll get a couple next week. But thank you to everyone again for following and commenting and having a chat in the group. Remember to like, subscribe, press the bell icon, all those things Rob is always telling you to do. Go over to our Facebook. He loves it. He loves a bell icon. An Ian Bell icon, as he calls them. Go over to our Facebook page or go to cricket8.com. We've got a new game coming on Cricket8 soon. So, that will be launched very shortly. So go over there, subscribe, do all those great things. But from me, Jarrod Kimber, and from him, Rob Barron, we will see you again very soon here on Cricket8.